Hello, everybody. I can see just about everyone in a little vignette on screen. It's quite interesting listening to the chatter before we started, and I heard the words very exciting and surprise, wonder and enjoyment. And I thought, well, I don't really need to give a talk. I'll just report that that's the way it went down, and that'll be absolutely fine. But if you feel the same afterwards, do let me know, but possibly not quite so enthusiastic. The first question I want to ask you is, how many of you have heard of the Esk Valley Trust? If you just wave, that will give me some indication. Okay, that's looks like about 50% or more. How many of you are members of the Esk Valley Trust? 1, 2. So there's plenty of scope, and I will be giving you the contact details for completing your membership at the end of the talk. And I can tell you, it's one of the best ways of completing the Thursday evening after listening to a talk is to complete a membership form for the Esk Valley Trust. So I look forward to a huge increase in membership afterwards. Right, to business. Now, in order to carry on the business, I need to share my screen with you. So I'm going to disappear from the full screen, and you're going to see a PowerPoint presentation which is going to guide me, and I hope also you, through this presentation. So I hope that you can now see that. Could you just wave at me to let me know that you can all see that? Good, excellent. In which case I will make you all smaller and start to talk about the Esk Valley Trust. What are we? Is a first question. About half of you know, and about half of you can guess. But we'll just run through that. I want to start off with a little bit of history of the trust. We're a small trust, and we have 3 broad activities: encouraging access, stimulating enjoyment. Already done that from your comments already, although perhaps that was about the technology, and enhancing understanding and appreciation in and of the valleys of the Esk rivers, of which there are 2, the North Esk and the South Esk, which to a very large degree are in the Lothians, Mid Lothian and East Lothian, although a tiny part of the North Esk does rise in the borders. And forgive me if the first few slides are a little bit textual, but that will change as we go on. There'll be lots of pictures later on. Our main constitutional goal, our main objective is this: stimulating public interest and care for the beauty, history and character of the valleys of the rivers Esk and their surroundings in the Lothians of Scotland in particular, etc., etc. You can read that, and that's been the objective from the start of the trust. And the key things there are stimulating public interest and care, promoting and encouraging responsible access, and doing these things for the benefit of local communities and others. As one of the things that I'm sure that you are aware of. I know you're not in Mid Lothian, where a large part of the river valleys are, but the surroundings of Edinburgh tend to be somewhat overlooked because of the dominance of the capital, and it would be great to be able to get greater understanding of the beautiful things that are around in Mid Lothian and East Lothian for visitors outside the area, and to a degree inside as well. The early days, not quite going back to cave paintings, but the first recorded meeting of people with an interest in setting up the trust was in October 2000, and that was held in the Laundry House at Dalkeith Country Park. There is a Laundry House, which I think is where SNH, Scottish Natural Heritage, had part of their base at the time. And you can see from the list here, I hope you can see this pointer that I'm using, that a number of organizations got their heads together, stimulated, of course, by some enthusiasts, to consider setting up a trust. They do tend to be in the central parts of the Esk Valleys. You'll note that there is no one there from the Musselburgh area, and no one from down in the Carlops area either. But this group of organizations got their heads together to consider what might be done to enhance interest in the Esk Valleys. And a couple of months later, there was a statement of intent that was issued as a consequence of that first meeting. And the intent was to form the trust, the Esk Valley Trust, as a legal entity, to acquire formal conservation status for the entire Esk River Valley. Now, that's a fairly grand objective, and it hasn't ever really been realized, nor particularly pursued, apart from in those very early days. The goals since then have been perhaps a slightly lower level of ambition, and perhaps a bit more realistic. And the other thing that was identified there very clearly was establishing the North Esk Way, or sometimes known as the Esk Valley Way, which would be a continuous path along the River North Esk. And as you will see shortly, there's also plenty of discussion about having a similar path along the South Esk. And the trust was incorporated in 2001, and Bill Dobson, who was the driving force, Bill and Ann Dobson, were the driving forces of the foundation of the trust, and he became the founding chairman. So we've existed as an established entity since 2001, which means next year we celebrate our 20th anniversary. Bill sadly died in 2007, 2008, and Tom Stevenson took over as chairman at that point. Tom was chairman until about 2011, and then David Sugden became the chairman, and I took over in 2014, 2015. So there have been four chairmen to date, with approximately similar lengths of time when I come to think of it. In 2019, we converted from a limited company to become SCIO, a Scottish Charitable Incorporated organisation. And I hadn't been involved in converting a limited company to a SCIO before, and it sounds as though it might be a slightly challenging activity, but it turned out to be remarkably easy. Once we'd drafted a constitution using a sort of pro forma guideline constitution and cutting and pasting into it the key things that were there from our former constitution as a limited company, filling in a relatively straightforward application form and some additional documentation to prove that we had consulted with our membership and had approval to do this. Then the whole thing went through in essentially a couple of months, from essentially start to finish. So it was a very, very simple process, which was very reassuring. So we're now a Scottish Charitable Incorporated organisation, which has no effect on the trust at all in terms of its goals and the way that we operate on a day-to-day basis. One of the reasons for us doing that is that we can simplify our financial reporting. By simplifying, we also can reduce the costs of financial reporting, and we now only need to report to Oscar on an annual basis. We don't have to report both to Oscar and to Companies House. So it's a simplification, and many organisations have gone through it, and perhaps you have too. Perhaps tell me at the end. Current trustees are 6 of us. One is in the audience this evening. That's Roger Crofts up the top left there. So he will be well known to you. Pat Franklin from New Battle. Pat is clearly the shyest member of the group. I wasn't able to extract a picture of her when I asked for it for this presentation. But Pat has been a trustee since 2011, I think. So she is a long-standing trustee from New Battle. Rennie Fraser, who lives in Edinburgh. Rennie was formerly our company secretary when we were a company, and he now is a trustee, but he looks after the financial part of the trust business. Ben Miller from Esk Bank, myself from Lowen Head, and Peter Rain from Carlops. So we have a reasonable geographical spread of the communities that relate to the Esk. Where we feel that we have a gap at the moment is in the Pennycook area, and we keep exploring how we might find someone who is enthusiastic to join the group of trustees from the Pennycook area, but haven't been successful yet. Hopefully we will be in the not too distant future. So that's a brief history, and those are the trustees. What are our 3 main lines of activity? What do we actually do? Well, the first concerns access, and access to us is access along the rivers so that people can walk along the rivers, ideally close to the rivers, wherever we possibly can. And if people wish to walk the length of the rivers, they can do so. So access by working to complete continuous pathways along the rivers is a major part of what the Trust has been about from its inception. We also own a piece of woodland, the Huon Wood. And I'm going to talk in detail about each of these as we go along. And that was bought fairly shortly after the Trust was established. Then we have this rather more diffuse activity of stimulating appreciation, which we can do with talks and walks and so on, but appreciation of what? And it's appreciation of the local environment, the physical environment, but also the heritage associated with that environment in all kinds of different ways. So let's start with access along the rivers. And in 2007, the Esk Valley Trust Executive Committee, as it was then called, minuted this nice statement. Our first priority should be to establish the long distance path, the Esk Valley Way, and that continues to be our top priority to this day. And the aim of that path is a source to see from the Borstein here up in the Pentlands, along the length of the river to this place with which you'll be very familiar, which is the entry of the River Esk into the Firth of Forth in Musselburgh. I always struggle to be sure which of the several stones at the top of the Pentlands is actually the Borstein. This, I think, may well be it. And it does look as though it has a bit of a hole in it, as Borsteins tended to be either boundary markers or places where a standard could be raised. So you could imagine somebody raising a standard and putting the shaft of the standard into the little socket here, and a dynamic crowd raising their voices about something or other. I've looked hard to find out what standard may have been raised at the top of the Pentlands at the Vorstein, and I've never found any evidence of any standard ever having been raised. So I hope I'm taking a picture here of the right Vorstein, but if not, it's close to this one. Your eyes will have caught this wording, I'm sure, in this statement of priority, that achieving the long distance path will require funding in the order of millions, and detailed project planning will be required. Now, I have to tell you now that millions have never been accrued to the Esk Valley Trust. If they have, they disappeared very quickly because there's no record of them in the financial statements. So it was big thinking at that stage, and presumably the big thinking was that the path would be a very accessible path for a good part of its length. Acquiring millions, we have never achieved that, and in the time that I've been involved with the trust, we haven't been thinking about funding of that order. So let's have a look at these paths along the rivers. Now, the blue line goes along the North Esk River, and the green line along the South Esk River. We tend to not concentrate very much on the South Esk in our day-to-day activities, and the reason for that goes back to very early conversations that I wasn't party to, but there are records in the early minutes of trust discussions that the Midlothian Council stated a willingness to take responsibility for establishing the way along the South Esk River, and the council has certainly taken some action to do that. But there is no complete path along the South Esk. There is plenty of path there from the rising of the South Esk in the Lammermuirs above Gladhouse Reservoir, and then along and through Arniston, Dalhousie Castle, Batlamy, and on to Dalkeith Country Park, where the two rivers meet. But our attention has been very much on the North Esk River, which is the blue line here from the Vorstein in the Pentlands, on the ridge of the Pentlands, going down to Carps and along to Musselburgh. And along the way, there are various communities and identifiable places that make the North Esk a busier area for activity, and one which has been the main focus of the work of the Trust over the years. In total, the North Esk Way, given all the bends and squiggles, is about 44 kilometres in length. So it's a good walk, or a good series of walks. In 2012, so 11 years after the establishment of the trust, a lady called Viv Wood-G, who, as you will see from this, is a consultant dealing with countryside management, she was commissioned to look at the potential for creating a continuous path along the North Esk River, and to identify what would need to be done in order to fully establish it. And this report that she produced in 2012 is, in many senses, our background working document still when it comes to considering how do we achieve the continuous path along the North Esk. Because about 3/4 of it, possibly even more, is there, it's in place, there are paths, there are lovely walks, and many people enjoy them. But we don't have all of the North Esk Way yet completed. And these are the sticking points. The passage between New Hall Estate, which is just outside Carlops, to the Pennycook Estate, Melville High Drive, which is near Melville Castle, the passage from Melville Castle to Dalkeith Country Park, and then the passage through Dalkeith Country Park on the way to Musselburgh. I'll talk a little bit about where these sticking points are and what we've been doing to try and overcome them. And one of the guiding principles of any group that's trying to establish a pathway is to be able to get the goodwill and support of the appropriate landowners. And you can imagine that failing to get goodwill and enthusiastic support from landowners perhaps lies behind some of the issues that we have here in overcoming these obstacles, these sticking points on the North Esk Way. Let's start with New Hall to Pennycook. Now I'm going to use a number of maps in this presentation from now on, and they're drawn from different sources, so forgive me for the lack of consistency in the style of the maps, but I hope that they're all sufficiently clear that you can understand them. So this one shows the thinking on the route for the path, the North Esk Way, between Carlops and Pennycook in the early years. Borstein is up here in the top left, going down through the North Esk Reservoir to Carlops, and on the New Hall Estate is this area here that I'm circling with the pointer. And the initial thinking was that the best route for the path was on the south side of the river, along the south bank of the Esk, reaching the main road through Pennycook, A701, and following that line all the way along. And this area is known as the Auchincourt Moss, which is a pretty tricky area to walk through. It's boggy and messy. And there are tenants here in the farms that from the early days, and this is in Viv Woodgee's report, were not at all enthusiastic about having a path through their land and were not helpful. So subsequently, and here's a change of map, the route from Carlops to Pennycook that we have encouraged people to walk, because you can do it, there are paths, is through the New Hall Estate, unfortunately up to the main road here. This is the road down to Biggar, and then back down towards the river and along through the Pennycook Estate on this north side of the river to Pennycook House. And then there are a number of paths in Pennycook Estate, but the ideal path will be to walk along by the river here and then on up here. Now the Pennycook Estate are very helpful when it comes to thinking about paths through the estate, but they would prefer that our path doesn't go through this part of the estate for a number of reasons. One of them, perhaps becoming a little bit historical now, is that they grow birds for shooting in this area of the estate, and they don't want to have too many people walking past and disturbing the birds with dogs and so on. So we've had a number of very useful discussions with the Pennycook Estate and have been looking at how we might devise an alternative route that would track down from Pennycook House, cross the river to the south side, and then cross it again to follow a path right next to the river to avoid the area that the red path goes through. There is no formal path here at the moment. And then to Brunstein Castle, and then on. And those discussions have been very helpful, but we would need to replace the rickety, rackety bridge that is currently in place at this point. And to avoid having to walk up to a very fast section of the main road, which is potentially quite dangerous, we are looking at the prospects of crossing the river on an existing bridge here, creating a path which doesn't exist at the moment, and then building a new bridge across here, and with landowners' approval to go through there. We have the landowners' approval to do that. We need a new bridge there. And one of the possibilities that we're exploring with Pennycook Estate at the moment is whether we could entice the army from the barracks down in Pennycook to help us with that exercise. Unfortunately, not all landowners are as helpful as they may be. And there is a landowner who shall remain nameless, who owns this area of land, which has a fence here with no stile. And we would love to be able to put a simple stile at this point here, to cross over, but he is unwilling to allow that to happen. We can't, of course, tell us we can't have access, but we can't do that. So we have an impediment there, but it's a simple wooden fence, you can climb over it. Since I first drew this map, I've had another discussion with the Pennycook Estate, and there are now reasons why this black line is not a desirable route because of developments on the estate. So we're back to looking for a more southerly route to cross, and we'd need a bridge at this point. But that still would be a lovely walk. So I'm actually quite confident that we will achieve an improved route in this area in the foreseeable future. Melville High Drive is a bit more of a challenge. Yet another different map, I'm afraid. What we're looking at here is the very complicated roundabout at Esk Bank, where my cursor is, if you want to position yourself. Melville Castle is the building here. And the High Drive runs through the woodland on the north side of the Melville estate, down to what is now the King's Acre Golf Course at this point. Now this is a lovely woodland walk and has been walked for many years by many people, walking dogs and so on. But the owner of the house here, who again shall remain nameless, does not encourage people to walk on his land. So there are fences and private property notices at each end of the Melville High Drive, which we think is part of an old Roman road, the old Roman road. And that, of course, is against the spirit of the Land Reform Act. So access should be possible through there. The owner argues that we are infringing the curtilage of his house, but the walk is well away from the house. It's a long-standing dispute, and we don't know how to resolve that one. Once we leave the High Drive, our next challenge is to find a way into the Dalkeith Country Park. And we can walk out of the Melville Castle grounds, and we could walk into the park through the King's Gate, which until recently we were very much against, because it's a very dangerous road. And in fact, there was a fatal accident there about 3 years ago. But recently lights have been put on there, and once they're working, they're not at the moment, perhaps that becomes a possibility. Another route into Dalkeith and then into the country park through the town gate would be to go to the Iron Mills Park here. This is just an expansion of this area, which would track a path into the park and then out again. But the challenge here is the railway line, the Waverley line, which cuts across the path, and there is no access under the viaduct. So we're in discussion with a group which is not yet formed at Iron Mills to reawaken a discussion about possibly creating a suspended pathway under there. But that will be relatively expensive. That's going to be possibly not at quite a six-figure sum, but approaching it. So that bridge there is the same as that one there. So we have issues accessing Dalkeith Country Park. But we could go in either through the King's Gate or the Town Gate. And once you're in Dalkeith Country Park, there are many attractive pathways that take you to the meeting of the waters here, where the North Esk River meets the South Esk River and then flows on towards Musselburgh. A neat way of following the river from the meeting of the waters would be to follow this path, which does exist. It's a very good existing path near the river, but it is reserved for horses according to the estate, and pedestrians are not encouraged. So it would be difficult for us to highlight that as a route through the park. The ideal exit to the northern side of the park would be to follow the river and then go through here and then join the cycleway from here that goes all the way along the river to Musselburgh, which many of you will know well, I'm sure. Good idea, but for security reasons on the estate, that's blocked off. The way out then of the country park seems to be the Smeaton Gate, and I think we've come to a view that pragmatically that's where we are, at least for now, before we can do anything about this more northerly route, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. It's a good existing exit, but the road it goes on to is a busy road and a reasonably narrow footpath, but it's possible, so we can pass through the park, but perhaps not our ideal route. The reason that Dalkeith Country Park can argue that we're not, they wouldn't approve as identifying certain paths on the estate as part of the North Esk Way is that within the Land Reform Act there is this section 6 which covers land over which access rights are not exercisable, and if for not fewer than 90 days in the year ending on 31st January 2001, members of the public were admitted only on payment, and extra detail just below, then the land can be deemed to be exempt from the Act. And that's the argument that the estate has put up, because they did at one time charge £1 entry fee into the country park. Whether that is still the case is perhaps a moot issue. And I know that Midlothian Council are minded to test whether or not the country park is still of that mind, but for now that's where they are. But it's interesting that back in June 2001, Bill Dobson wrote to James Kinch, who is still with Midlothian Council and with whom I still have discussions about this issue, for the trust to be involved in the council's discussion with Buccleuch Estates. This is a long-standing issue which is it's been with the trust for as long as the trust has existed, just about. But for the North Esk Way, I think we are perhaps at a slightly glacial pace, making some progress to overcome these limiting factors. But it does depend on us getting agreement with the landowners. Pennycook, very helpful. Melville High Drive, not helpful. Buccleuch Estates also not as helpful as they might be. But even with agreements, we need to find the funds to cost up what needs to be done and to get the funds to do the work. And for the Pennycook estate, I think we are very close to this third one now. So that's good news. The Huon Wood. Huon Wood lies between Lonehead, or Poulton more correctly, and Roslin. I'm speaking to you from a point round about where the cursor is at the moment, so it's just across the way from me. It's an area of woodland that sits right on the North Esk River, and a brief history of it is that it used to be part of the Hawthorne Den Castle estate. It was sold to the Lasweg Riding Centre in 1978, and at that time the area of the woodland, this red area in the top right of the picture, was both the woodland, which is the right hand bit, and a boggy area which we refer to as the Huon Bog, which is the southerly bit, the bit at the bottom. That bit was hived off in the late 70s, and the Huon Wood, as it now is, was bought by Mrs. Watt in Pennycook in '83, and she and her sister put it up for sale in 2001, which is just the time that the trust was forming. And the trust bought it for £28,000 in 2002 with support, which means grants, from SNH and other charitable trusts. So this is the shape of the Huon Wood as it now is, and it's a beautiful area of woodland sitting on this curve of the river, with this part of the wood known as the Maiden Castle. It is the site of a Bronze Age settlement. In total, it's about 12 hectares, which are around about 30 acres in old money, if you like. And the Huon Wood forms part of this continuous chain of woodland along the Roslin Glen. So it's a very beautiful part of the route along the river. It has an SSSI, and for those who are enthusiastic about glacial sediments, it's the SSSI, Site of Special Scientific Interest, is to do with sedimentary deposits in the northern part of the bank that were deposited there during the retreat of glaciers 10,000 years ago. There are paths through the woodland. The Paths for All gave us a little bit of money to print out some leaflets about the Huon Wood a few years ago. There are a series of paths through the woodland that are walked very regularly. This is the Roslin Glen path along here, which is part of the North Esk Way, and it is used very well. Our challenge, of course, is to manage it, and in order to manage it, we need first of all a management plan, and then a grant, which we have from forestry improvement schemes, woodlands in and around town, Wyatt program. We need people to help us, and this is a picture of what a group of volunteers working in the woodland on a special occasion. If you look carefully at the picture, you'll note a bottle of bubbly because it was Joe the Ranger's birthday on the occasion that we did this, and the Ranger Service in Midlothian Council have been very helpful to us in pulling people together with us to work on the wood. We need equipment, and we paid for that out of the Paths for All grant. And we've done various things in the wood over time. More recently, with the Wyatt grant, we've been able to renew fencing, to put up to waymarker posts, finger posts to point people in the right direction, and some thinning of the trees for the long-term management of the woodland. Visitors are very welcome. At the solstice, well, certainly the spring solstice each year we get people who come and camp to celebrate the solstice. This is a picture from this year. This is the day immediately after the solstice, and this is the day after that. And you can see that they have tidied up well and left the place neat and tidy. That's excellent. Visitors like that are always welcome. Other visitors who see signs to warn them not to walk in certain parts of the woodland because it's dangerous are not so welcome when they smash the signs and vandalise the signage to warn people about the dangerous part of the wood. But I suppose that's mankind. The third line of activity, this nebulous appreciation, is many stranded, and I'll just walk you through some of the things that we are considering about the Esk Valleys in this context of enhancing appreciation. So we can look at this map of the two rivers, the North Esk and the South Esk. And along those rivers are many grand houses, from Newhall here in the southern end to New Hales, the northern end. You'll be very familiar with that. Rosebery down here, further south along the South Esk, Arniston, and so on. And the villas of the Esk are many more than that, in is slightly less grand houses, but many of them were the houses out of town for the wealthy residents of Edinburgh. And James Simpson, who I'm sure you will be very familiar with, the architect who's done a lot of work on various of these buildings over the years, has been very keen to develop the concept of the villas of the Esk as an underlying argument for considering the Esk Valleys as a World Heritage Site. And that's a little bit like the big thinking in the very early days of the Esk Valley Trust to say that we would have special status for the Esk Valleys. It's perhaps too grand for us at the moment, but it is part of the heritage of the Esk Valleys that are perhaps not as well appreciated as maybe. The Esk Valleys have a considerable history of artistic talent from the time that Turner was out painting Roslin Castle. This is Roslin Castle here. William Gillis, based in Temple. William McTaggart, the younger McTaggart, who was based just up the road from where I am here in Lowen Head. Victoria Crowe, outside Carlops, with her famous paintings of the Shepherdess. And currently, younger artist Anya Devine in Roslin. Doreen Woodhead actually lives in East Lothian, but was artist in residence in Carlops at one stage. Alison Kinnaird in Temple. There are a lot of artistic talent there, and a history and heritage to go with it. How many of us know enough about that? There's a detailed geology of the Esk Valleys, which has been documented. David Sugden stimulated the production of this leaflet about the geology and scenery of the Esk Valley a few years ago, which goes into some very interesting detail about the geological background to the Esk Valleys. And there is a considerable attachment to literary figures too. This really needs filling in a lot more. From Alan Ramsay in the Carlops area, the Wordsworths used to be regular visitors here. William Drummond of Hawthorne Den, famous poet. Thomas de Quincey, Diary of an English Opium Eater. He was not far away from where I am here. And a huge industrial heritage that I'm sure you're very familiar with. A lot of it geared to the mining industries. And this picture from the Coal Authority shows, with all these black lines are shafts underneath the ground. This is the subterranean architecture of the area, with Lonehead here. This is the main road down to Pennycook, Dalkeith Country Park here. A phenomenal array of tunnels and shafts, and each of the red crosses is an entry stroke exit point for mining activity over many, many years. And these are the ones that are known. I'm sure there are many more that are not known. And tied to all of that infrastructure is the above ground architecture, but also the social history of mining in the area. And this is a picture from the miners' strike of 1984 outside Bilston Glen Colliery, which is not far away from where I am here. Not only coal mining though, but other industries in your areas. You'll be very familiar with the Brunton wire factory up here, the fishing in Musselburgh, Smeaton Brickworks, a number of paper mills along the Esk, major ones here in Poulton, down the road from me, and in Pennycook, gunpowder mill in Roslin, carpets, also near to Roslin, shale oil industry, where the retail park now is just outside Lonehead. A large range of industries and an intensity using the power of the river in the early days, which led to the North Esk River being one of, if not the most polluted river in the whole of the United Kingdom. And to the casual visitor now who is walking along the tree-lined pathways along the river, hardly noticeable, which is quite remarkable. Social history tied to industry, of course, but social history goes back a long way. Battle of Roslin in the Wars of Independence, the Clark family very active in active union and Enlightenment times, industrialisation, of course. Gladstone MP for Midlothian in 1880. He introduced the Great Reform Act in 1884, which was part of the start of enhancing the spread of the vote and balancing up the size of constituencies. And when he was elected as the MP, Liberal MP for Midlothian, the Duke of Buccleuch swore that neither he nor any member of his family would live in Dalkeith Palace again until a Tory was returned to that seat. And he's still waiting. So, and then we go on to the miners' strike. And this is sort of high-level stuff, but lots of stories of the real people, if you like, of the valleys too, to be told. There's a lot to learn, and a huge amount of science associated with the Esk Valley too. I will admit to a bias here in that I've been involved in the science of in the Esk Valleys, but James Clerk Maxwell here on the left, he was the nephew of the 6th Baronet Clerk of Pennycook, and he, together with Newton and Einstein, you take their various contributions, are very much the founders of our understanding of the nature of matter today. His understanding of electricity and magnetism both being waveforms that have a common base is very, very important. Ian Wilmot here and Dolly the sheep created the Roslin Institute, and the Bush Estate here in the middle, not far from the Esk Valley, has a whole range of research activities. The Roslin Institute, the vet school, the Moordam Institute, the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, the Forestry Research Station, which is a significant contributor in certain areas. And I was part of this mix here for quite some time, and we're always very proud of saying this is one of the largest, if not the largest, concentrations of veterinary and animal scientists in the whole of Europe, which I think it still is, and possibly not appreciated outside the scientific community too much. So those are our three main lines of activity. Access is by far and away the biggest in terms of day-to-day activity, but maintaining the hue and wood is also an important action for us. And the bit in the middle, this appreciation bit, really comes down to organising walks and talks. Not that we're doing much on those at the moment. We've not been Zoom talking as you are. And we are involved at the moment in thinking how we can put together these stories of the Esk, the heritages of the Esk, and are working with the Mavis Bank Trust to think how we might best do that. We have various issues on the Esks, which I'm sure you are familiar with, the pollution issues that arise from time to time. A couple of years ago, very nasty pollution at the Maryburn near Newbattle, with effluent contaminating the river, and more recently very clear evidence of seepage out of old mine workings at Old Fordell. Junkies at it. I'll show you where that is in a minute. This isn't a new issue. It was exaggerated, I think, in the spring because the latest outflow, concentrated outflow, occurred at a time when the river was low after a particular dry spell. And Colin Beattie, the MSP, has now set up an Esk River Improvement Group, and Roger Crofts, who's listening to this, is on that group now to try and see what can be done to get solutions, long-lasting solutions to the problems. This is just a documentation of iron levels in the river from this. This is Dalkeith Country Park here, centre of Dalkeith here. This is where the outflow was occurring, and you can see very strong contamination of the river down to Musselburgh. And on this map, this is where Junkies Addict is trying to relate what comes out of there to where it comes from. You can see it's a pretty impossible task. We've also had issues of local residents cutting off parts of the path. This was particularly the case down in Pennycook, where the residents of Cairnbank Road closed the road. They closed the path that went along that road and then onto the riverbank in Pennycook for some time, and Midlothian Council had to go to a pretty expensive court action to get it opened up again. And we have a representative on the Midlothian Access Forum who was very much involved in trying to deal with that issue with the council. Thankfully, it reopened in February 2019, so that's no longer a problem. That's a one that you can tick off as problem solved. So that's what we do. Realizing our goals means that we need the means to achieve. And the first means to achieve is finance. At the start of this year, this was our financial position. So you can see that we are not blessed with the millions of pounds that were talked about in the very early days of the trust. We divide our funds into three bits: unrestricted, which is money that we can spend on anything; restricted funds, which is money that's tied largely to the hue and wood and maintenance of the hue and wood, and the value of the hue and wood itself, £29,000. As a matter of principle, the way we operate the trust is to try and keep this fund above £3,000. 3,000 we think is the lower limit. So that's a little bit more than 1 year's turnover, so that we try to work to keep our reserve, if you like, at the £3,000 level. So we're not overburdened with funds, and if we want to do something, we need to go out and get grants to do it. Membership is the other means to achieve things. That's the hands to do the work. And a very quick look at membership numbers over the years. You can see that now we have about 90 or so numbers of members. Some are individuals, some are family memberships. But we have this recurring issue of people who are enthusiastic, I'm sure, but forget to pay. And we now have a rule that said if you forget to pay for 2 years on the trot, then you drop off the list. Very welcome to rejoin, but have to drop off the list. Over time, the membership numbers have dropped. This is interesting. There are good records on numbers up to 2007, and then a gap. And in that gap, our numbers approximately halved, or more than halved. So we now run at about half the level that we did in the early days of the trust. I don't have an explanation for that, but that's where we are at the moment. And we're not alone. There is an organisation well known to you that minuted this statement in 2009, and some notes for a meeting in March 2020. You identified that you have 86 members, and you mentioned younger participants and membership numbers being a challenge, and that's a challenge for us too, as our membership is not completely young, would be a nice way to say it, and our numbers aren't as high as I would like them to be. We have to ask, where are the future members going to come from? And our thoughts about that are largely to do with developments around Midlothian and East Lothian. These are the development areas around Musselburgh, plenty of new houses there, and in Midlothian there are plans for new houses all over the place. On a very, very small scale, we have just started to leaflet new developments to see if we can encourage people in new homes, which are likely to be younger families, and to get more younger family membership. Whether we'll be successful, I don't know. I have realised that there is a huge resource of potential future members in another place, of course, but that's up to you. So what does the future hold for the Esk Valley Trust? Where are we heading in the future? Finishing the North Esk Way, #1 priority, always has been and continues to be. Sustaining the Hue and Wood and managing it so that it's there in good shape for the long term is also important. Revitalising membership, that's a challenge for all trusts like us, as you well know. And looking for ways to progress the stories of the Esk, the heritage stories of the Esk, is something that we're thinking about, but we are a bit cautious about it because our priority is finishing the North Esk Way. We don't want to put efforts into things which will take us away from that, but that is still another interesting thing to be doing. I think we do need to be working better with others, and perhaps we've let that slip a little over the last little while, getting more involved with other community groups, so that we do have a good cohesion along the Esk Valleys. And who knows what else will come up. But those are the things that entertain us at the moment and interest us, that we want to make progress with. So thanks for listening. I hope I've not talked for too long. If you do want to contact us about anything, either look at the website, which is down in the bottom right-hand corner of the slides, or send us an email, and that's our email address. So thanks very much.